Well, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, however this might find you. Welcome to Riffing on Main Street. I am Ken Elmore. I'm the president of Dean College, and I like to pull people together from here and there and every now and then just to riff a little bit, to talk a little bit, to have a conversation about who they are really. And the great tradition of Howard Thurman. I'm doing that today, and I'm here with Catherine Kennedy, who is a longtime colleague and friend, and I thought she's got some really interesting stories that I'd love to talk with you about. So, Catherine, tell us who you are really, without giving me a title or anything like that. What's your work? What do you do?
Well, thank you, Ken. I believe that my work is to bring people together, people who come from different backgrounds or different races, people who have different kinds of personalities, and I like to believe that I can help them learn how to work together, to socialize together, and that's not exactly talking about my job, but I think that I do that in everyday life all the time, whether it's professionally or personally.
So why'd you pick that? Why do you think how'd you get there?
I think my entire life, I have found that I've been put in situations where I have not been in one race, in terms of I haven't been always with all black people or all white people. From my childhood, I've had to learn to live and socialize with people who are different from me, people who are like me, and I just find that that's the way I believe the world should be, and that's the way my family taught me. And then as I came to know of Howard Thurman, I know that that is the way that he believed we all as humans should come together.
So do you think that this was a matter of geography that got you there? Was it a matter of the times? How do you think you got on that track to those beliefs?
I think, it's interesting that you should mention geography because I was raised in Boston, Massachusetts. So, and going back many decades of my life, yes, the location would have played a role. I think my family upbringing definitely played a role. And I think the time in the world and in the country in particular that I grew up definitely had an effect on how I view humankind. Here's
what's interesting for me, Catherine. You grew up in a world of segregation,
yes,
of extreme violence that was readily out there in Boston,
yes,
where you could find that a lot more readily than most places, and yet you still go to and gravitate to this sort of universal thinking about people coming together. Why do you think that's the case?
I want to believe that part of it is a part of my DNA.
Okay.
I think my family upbringing was always about loving your neighbor. I am also not ashamed to say that I am a Christian, so I would have been brought up in believing that we are all God's children and that we are supposed to learn to live together and love each other and look out for each other. And so I think experiences in my life, work experiences as well as social experiences, forced me to have to live up to that mantra.
Now, you have always been a first in so many ways. Talk to us a little bit about some of those firsts that you have been a part of.
Well, if I go back to my childhood, I was probably the first child in the community to have to live in a tuberculosis sanatorium for 3 years, which only had one other black child at the time.
All
other
right,
than
tell
myself.
folks what a tuberculosis. Oh my gosh!
Tuberculosis. That was one of the major killers, along with polio, of children and adults, particularly tuberculosis in the 50s. And so I spent 3 years in a hospital without my family, without the day-to-day care of my loved ones, but dependent on people who were going to heal me. But also at one point I was able to live in one of the wards with other children. and who were not like me. The only thing we had in common was the tuberculosis. They were different races, they were different ages, but they were all girls. And so that was probably the beginning of when I realized I had to learn to live and be friends with other people. And I was aware that there was only one other black child than me, but it wasn't so much because I was so conscious, it was because of the staff making me conscious that I was different. So on those weekends when my family came to visit, they reinforced in me my worth, my value, their love of me, and that this would soon be overcome.
Got it.
And then as I continued to grow, and I had experiences in my high school where my family had to petition the city of Boston school committee for me to be able to go to an exam high school, which was 99% white girls, so that I could be prepared for college. And so those kinds of obstacles never stopped my family because they were educators and they believed that we had the right to be educated. So, but through all of that, they never allowed me to develop any kind of animosity or fear. My father used to say, and he said it to me, especially when I became a professional and when affirmative action and those kinds of issues were at hand, he would say, it doesn't matter how you got there, you have to show when you get there that you are qualified and able to succeed. So I was never allowed to feel less than, and was always encouraged to be the best that I could be. And I know that sounds a little cliche, but
yeah, but you were.
But I was.
Yeah, I know that my parents would always say to me that I could have whatever I wanted to, and I could be in any place that I wanted to, so long as I kept my mind in the right space and I carried myself the way that I belonged in places, but not only that, but owned those places. Those were important. Now, you also were in the thick of, I'm sticking with Boston a bit. You were in the thick of desegregation movements. You did some work as a journalist around that.
I did, and what's so interesting,
You also lived it too.
I lived it.
Right.
I lived in the community. So when I went to work as a newspaper journalist, I was really a rookie. I had been at the newspaper, but I had been an administrator. I had been the executive assistant to the editor-in-chief of the paper. And he had seen something in me and encouraged me to go to grad school to become a reporter. And not only did he encourage me, he actually forced me by putting the application on my desk, making me apply. And then once I got accepted, arranged for it to be paid for. At any rate, when I came back to the newspaper, I was a rookie. And I came back, I finished school like in June, and school was opening in September. And I was aware that desegregation was going to be implemented in September, but I didn't expect to have any role in it because I, again, was the rookie. And I was given an assignment that wasn't supposed to be particularly newsworthy. I was sent to the community center, the Freedom House, which is well known in Boston, which was the headquarters for the opening day of school. So parents who didn't know where to take their children to catch the bus or to what schools, they had administrators there to help them out. So I was sent there to just see what might happen. And no one expected a story. And nothing did happen all day until school got out and the buses were stoned by angry people in South Boston. And so the buses brought the children to the Freedom House. And the parents were there to pick them up. And by that time it had sort of hit the news, the other media, the TV media. And there was a demand for the mayor to be and the police commissioner to be at the Freedom House because parents wanted to know that their children would be safe. And actually they were refusing to send their kids to school. The interesting thing, I was still functioning in this rookie mode, but understood this was a very serious story. So I went to the telephone, because we didn't have cell phones then, and we were trained to always carry nickels and dimes for the pay phones. And I called the city desk and I said, you have to get reporters here quick. This buses have been stoned, the children are here, the parents are here, the mayor's here, everybody's here. Please send reporters. And the city desk editor said to me, Kennedy, you are the reporter on the scene. Get back there and get that story. So I went back and got out my little notebook, and I was writing, and was so nervous and knew that I had to look up every few minutes to see what was happening on the stage. But I was sitting in the audience, and then I got a tap on my shoulder, and it was two colleagues from the newspaper. And I said, oh, good, you're here. They said, we're not here to get the story. We're here to just make sure you're okay and to get you back in time to file your story. So on the way in the car, they said to me, okay, we're going to get you started. What's the lead? And they helped me figure out each section of my story. I go into the city desk and I give my little report, and the city editor says, good job, Kennedy. And as I turned to walk away, he said, now go get it, because that's frontable. I froze. I said, frontable? I'm a rookie. I couldn't get over that I was a rookie. He said, you're not a rookie now. You've got the big story of the day. I went to my typewriter, because that's what we were using.
Right.
Electrics, though.
Oh.
We had moved to electrics.
Oh.
And I froze. My mind was like wiped clean. All I could hear him saying was, it's frontable. And I thought, I'm not qualified to have a front page story. Who am I? People all over this country will read this. It's got to be accurate. It's got to be fair. It's got to be objective. And as I'm sitting there emotionally going through all of this, these same two colleagues came over. One in particular said, what's wrong? I don't see you typing. I said, I can't do this. He said, yes, you can. You did it in the car. Start all over. And once he had me started, the lead was always the toughest thing for me. So I ended up with a front page story, The Rookie. And then it was decided that the children reported that there was danger in the schools, that they didn't feel safe in the schools. And the system had put in operation bus monitors. And so it was agreed between the city and my newspaper that I would ride the bus and pretend to be a bus monitor, and would be allowed to go inside the school and just observe what was going on and then be able to report it back. And I did that for a week. And I did ride the buses that were stoned, where people were rocking the buses and trying to turn them over. And it was the kids on the bus that gave me the strength to be brave. I was in shock, because I'm still thinking, okay, now I'm a reporter riding the bus. But the rocks were going to hit me, the broken glass was going to hit me, and it was the children that pulled me to the floor of the bus.
Wow.
And said, get down, get down. And so, yes, that was a major first in my life.
And it was your first Pulitzer Prize.
I was part of the team. I'm very clear about that. I didn't get an individual Pulitzer Prize, but two of my pieces were a part of the group that was submitted for a Pulitzer Prize for meritorious public service.
Wow. Well, you know, a few things you mentioned so resonate with me. So I was in New York City, but I was one of those kids on a bus. I was bused. And for people who want to look into more things, busing is something you should take a look at. It's been a long time, but we do it in different ways nowadays. It may not be on a bus, but we do it in other ways. But look at busing. So I was one of those kids on a bus, and buses that got stoned, buses that had to be escorted with snipers in New York City. And we didn't get rocked, but I can remember just every day having this pit in my stomach, fearful that we would get shot, we would get killed. And my parents said, you got to go. You got to go to school. You're not going to not go to school.
Yes.
And I saw so many of my colleagues, my peers, just drop out of school because they were not going to do that.
Wow.
And some of my colleagues and peers dropped out of schools because they said they weren't going to go to school with black kids as well. So that's that thing that, you know, wow, when you talk about that, I feel like, yeah, I was one of those kids. I was just in New York. You know, the other thing you mentioned that you talk about. Now we have a name for it. We call it imposter syndrome. This notion that I don't deserve that big story. I can't write that big story. What am I doing here? And many people, and especially with people of color and women, we get into those feelings. But you obviously have always done some things to put that on the wayside, to get through that. What do you do to get through that?
It's interesting you mention that, because I think that experience was the only time I ever questioned my capability, or was I qualified. No other incident in my life did I feel that I didn't have the right to be there. But that was a major responsibility I felt. News is something that is consumed by almost every household. And I know that in journalism school I was trained to be fair and objective and honest. And that is not a hard thing if you have those qualities within you. But there is always that temptation when you're writing to sort of put your own personal feelings or touches on it. And so the challenge really was, how can I be objective when I am Black like these children? When the names that they're calling these children, they're also calling me. My being a reporter, my being an adult, did not change the internal feelings or the reactions that I was having, which these children who were much younger than me were also experiencing. So I think that the upbringing that I'd had, the experiences of always being affirmed by my family, by my church, by my community, and even in many ways by my doctors, who made sure that I got well, that I got over tuberculosis, that I left many children there when I went home that had been there before me. So somehow I felt grateful that either mine wasn't as severe, or somehow I reacted to the medications differently. So I guess, rather than ramble, what I'm trying to say is that I think all of the issues up to that point had always affirmed my worth. And I think with the exception of that, which was a major responsibility, was the only time that I can think of in my life that I felt maybe this imposter syndrome.
Got it. Well, there is, at the time of this taping, we are all waiting for the Supreme Court to drop whatever news is going to be out there about affirmative action. It is likely, many people think, that there will be an end to this thing that we know as affirmative action. And you worked in early days of affirmative action, probably in the 70s when the term was first coined. You were involved in a number of actions, and I dare say I am likely someone who who benefits from affirmative action. Actually, I think we all benefit from affirmative action, but there's this direct benefit that I think that I'm part of the exception and the rule to. But talk to us about some of those things that you were engaged in.
Well, I was fortunate enough, after the whole busing incident and the Globe winning the Pulitzer Prize, to be invited to UC Berkeley to set up a fellowship program that trained minority news reporters. And it wasn't right after. I mean, I covered busing for a while and had been a reporter for a couple of years before I did that. But at any rate, that was a new experience for me, because growing up in Boston and living on the East Coast, I was used to black and white. People were black or white. And it wasn't until just about the time, a couple of years before I was leaving Boston, that Puerto Ricans started immigrating to Boston. But they invited me to set up this program that would train minority news reporters. And for them, minorities in California meant Asians of several different ethnicities, Native Americans, Hispanics, and as well as Black folk. And so for me, that was going to be a brand new experience. I was going to have to step outside of my comfort zone once again to learn about these other ethnicities, to feel comfortable enough to go into those communities to recruit candidates for this program. And I was not fearful. I was not afraid. I just wanted to make sure that I was qualified, but qualified because I had done my homework to understand enough history of the groups of people that I would be trying to convince that our program would be helpful. And I'm proud to say that we successfully, I stayed with the program for 8 years. I was supposed to go for 1 and ended up liking it and stayed for 8. But not only did we train news reporters, it was also my responsibility to travel the country visiting newspapers to see if they would hire these young people after they graduated. And I think I had some tough choices sometimes around, the issue of affirmative action, getting newspapers to agree to participate in the program, but also trying to determine whether or not I was doing the student a disservice if I couldn't just place them anywhere to say that I accomplished my goal. I had to think about what city am I going to place this indigenous person in? What city am I going to place a black woman? Is she going to be able to be comfortable? Will she have a social life? Will they be accepted? And so, but the newspapers that got involved did so because they were getting backlash from the communities saying, you don't have reporters that represent the communities that buy your newspapers. So I was successful at that time because newspapers were still the major media. And I took great joy out of learning more about other cultures.
Right.
It helped me understand if I was ever to return to the East Coast, that I could never again accept a segregated society. And that segregation is more than just black and white.
Right. Wow. Well, you have described exactly what affirmative action should be.
Exactly.
Communities of people.
That's right.
Engaging each other, not skeptical of our humanity.
Exactly.
And I'm afraid that, no, I'm not afraid. We will be buttressed and we will be fierce and we will be courageous about making sure that we get to that experience that you had and that communities do these sorts of things and not degrade each other and focus solely on numbers as a piece.
I think with the other thing, because I'm fearful of what our Supreme Court may do, and if they don't make the right decision, we are then going to have to be hopeful and prayerful that good people will know that the best way of life is for us all to live together in peace and harmony, and we're going to be dependent on those good people to hire, I should say employ, to house, whatever is required so that we can have a just society.
That's a great point.
And my other fear is if we don't have enough good people in this country that think that way and act that way, will all of these years of my work have been in vain? I don't focus on the negative,
Right.
but it did cross my mind as I've been sitting waiting like everyone else is waiting to see the outcome. But I also believe in my heart that there are enough good people that are going to somehow make sure that we don't go backwards in our society.
I say to the good people, and if you are the good people watching this and you believe in justice, we've got to be good fighters as well for this. Watch this, and this will give you the cause and the reason for why we must be able to fight for the just and the good society, whatever that might mean. So, Catherine, I also know, or last set of questions, or conversation points. I know that you've spent an inordinate amount of your life under the spirit and the wisdom of Howard Thurman.
Absolutely.
Talk to us a little bit about that. And I know that's a big question, but I think we should introduce people to Howard Thurman.
Well, I will try to do it in a very brief way.
All right.
So first of all, Howard Thurman was a man of religion, an educator, a social philosopher, a poet and a preacher, and as well as an educator who believed in the unity of all people. And he believed that that unity could be achieved through the search for common ground. He is actually the person that coined that term, common ground, that we now use randomly. I see it on the names of restaurants, and people don't even understand.
Coffee shops.
Yes,
Right.
people don't even understand. But he believed that the search for common ground was a twofold journey, and he actually wrote a book with that title. And he believed that the first step in the search is one of when you can go down deep inside yourself, become secure in yourself, and really know who you are, really, then you can find yourself in every other human being. The second step in the journey is one of building community. He believed that we all as humans, we want to belong, we want to be liked, we want to be loved. And he believes that if we can act that out and not just say it, then we can find common ground with all of our brothers and sisters. Or as he liked to say, our unknown brothers and sisters.
Yeah, the unknown and the undiscovered.
Undiscovered, that's correct.
And so if you could give me a suggestion for maybe the first start to anything Howard Thurman, would it be The Search for Common Ground?
It would be The Search for Common Ground. That is one of his books. But I think for people who may need it in smaller doses, there are two books that I enjoy. One is The Inward Journey, and so that helps you discover yourself. And the other one is Meditations of the Heart. And he has different categories, but they're shorter, more poetic type of meditations that you can read, and I think give you the essence of his messages as well.
All right. Now, when we first started, I saw you reading something. Did you
Yes.
want to read a passage for us or talk about
Well,
something?
I was just going to sort of
I always ask
share
people what
with
they're
you.
reading and all
I
that good
know,
stuff.
and I wanted to share this book, and it's written by a dear friend who's a former journalist, both broadcast and newsprint journalist, and her name is Carmen Fields, and she wrote about her dad, who I knew of. I had never met him, but she was from Tulsa.
Yes.
And her father was the band leader for one of what was called in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, the territory big bands, because segregation was still alive and well.
Right.
They lived in Oklahoma, so that these bands, these big bands that were black, could only go to certain places. I've only gotten to the first 10 pages,
Right.
but I'm so excited for her that she was able to chronicle the history, not just of her dad, but of the times that these bands existed. And so I recommend that.
So that's going back to T-Town.
That's right.
And this is, wow, Ernie Fields.
Ernie
Wow.
Fields. And his son, her brother, Ernie Fields Jr., took over the band after their dad. But between the mid-1920s up to the 1960s,
Right.
territory big bands were the thing.
Wow. Well, I have known Miss Fields for so long.
Yes.
I never even knew she was from Tulsa.
Yeah, she's from Tulsa, and this book starts right after, the period after the Tulsa riots.
Right. Wow. And see, therein lies this notion. I've never had this kind of conversation with Carmen Fields to ask, who are you really? So
Yes.
that is the goal of this and these conversations. Well, Catherine, thank you for joining me today. And this
Thank
was
you for having me.
great. And we could go for hours and hours.
Yes, yes.
But they won't let us.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you. And thanks for joining us on Riffin on Main Street.
This program was made possible by your Franklin friends and neighbors, good folks just like you. Thanks for supporting Franklin TV. And thanks for watching.